It takes bravery. The deepest bullets are not to be feared. Phosphorus, napalm are nothing to be feared, but to look inward, to see that twisted mind that lies beneath the surface of all humans, and to say, yes, I accept you. I even love you because you're a part of me. You're an extension of me.
Before I begin my analysis, I want to clarify what this video is and what it is not. If you are looking for a pure story analysis of Apocalypse Now, allow me to direct you to videos that will provide that for you, because you won't find that here. Links are in the description box. What I wish to do with this video is demonstrate how the filmmaking process behind Apocalypse Now influenced the story's construction. Now, on the surface, this might sound boring and unnecessary compared to a simple explanation. However, understanding how Apocalypse Now's story came to be and why the movie was filmed the way it was is crucial to appreciating the film's genius. As this video goes on, you will understand, like I did, how this movie is more than just a story about the war in Vietnam. Rather, it's a story about you. Apocalypse Now reflects a timeless story about a universal human struggle. Every human being born into this world has the capacity for the worst possible forms of evil, and at some point in our lives, we have to ask ourselves the biggest of all existential questions. Do we accept the conditions of existence and strive to become higher moral beings? Or do we reject those conditions and embrace our savage, primordial instincts? Throughout Apocalypse Now, we see several characters struggle with that question, and the multiple ways they struggle reflect our own struggle with that question. By the end of this video, I hope you will understand, as I did, that we are all Colonel Kurtz, we are all Captain Willard, but we don't necessarily have to be. I hope you will understand how their characters are an extension of the dark side hidden within the actors who play them, as well as the director directing them. And above all, I hope you will understand that if you don't recognize that part of yourself, you and millions of others may find themselves in a hell, much like the one America experienced in Vietnam. Needless to say, there are spoilers ahead.
My film is not a movie. My film is not about Vietnam. It is Vietnam. It's what it was really like. It was crazy. And the way we made it was very much like the way the Americans were in Vietnam. We were in the jungle. There were too many of us. We had access to too much money, too much equipment, and little by little we went insane.
For the majority of this video, I will be referencing a documentary titled Hearts of Darkness, A Filmmaker's Apocalypse. The film chronicles the making of Apocalypse Now and the chaos that went on behind the scenes, all of which was limited to rumors and gossip prior to the documentary's release in 1991. The movie is famous for having, arguably, the most expensive and chaotic filmmaking process out of any movie ever made, at least at the time. The specifics of this will be littered throughout the video, but I'll start you off with some essential facts. Principal photography for Apocalypse Now began in the spring of 1976 and didn't end until May 21st of 1977. What was originally planned to be a 14-week shoot lasted 238 days, not to mention the fact that production was shut down for 6 weeks due to a typhoon, which destroyed all the sets. The film cost $30 million to produce, which in today's money would cost roughly $120 million. When the film went over budget, Coppola still wanted to retain creative control to execute his vision. Thus, he signed over his house and his winery to Chase Bank as collateral. Needless to say, Coppola faced financial ruin if Apocalypse Now wasn't successful, leading to a particularly stressful shoot. By the time principal photography was finished, there was 1.5 million feet of film left over, roughly 284 miles of footage. It took Coppola 2 years to sift through all of this footage and edit the final product together for its release on August 15th, 1979. I'm certain that if I mention the names George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, I don't need to give them any introduction. However, a mutual friend of theirs, a man named John Milius, probably does need an introduction. He is famous for writing movies like the first two Dirty Harry films, Conan the Barbarian, Red Dawn, and, of course, Apocalypse Now. Back in the late 1960s, Milius was encouraged by Spielberg and Lucas to try and write a movie script about something nobody in their right mind would consider doing at the time: the Vietnam War. Milius came up with the brilliant idea of taking a classic literary story in Heart of Darkness and putting it into a modern context. He was particularly determined to do this, as several people, including Francis Ford Coppola and his film school professors, told him that Heart of Darkness was not adaptable. Naturally, adapting the story was the first thing Milius tried. His script was originally titled The Psychedelic Soldier, but Milius was inspired to change the title to Apocalypse Now as a result of late 60s hippie culture. A popular slogan used by hippies, particularly in California at the time, was Nirvana Now, supposedly out of a desire to reach a state of, well, nirvana. If one wanted to achieve the exact opposite of that, a state of chaos and confusion that could only be found during wartime, one might say Apocalypse Now. While it may seem that Milius created the title just to make fun of hippies, there is actually a deeper psychological meaning to this. The inevitable question you might ask yourself is why anybody would want to achieve Apocalypse Now. Wouldn't Nirvana be preferable? Well, this is a question I'll address in more detail as we go along, but I'll give a very basic answer for now. One would want to achieve Apocalypse Now if one's soul is so corrupted by, as Marlon Brando puts it, that twisted mind that lies beneath the surface of all humans. As I shall demonstrate in a few minutes, the character of Captain Willard has a soul that has been so corrupted by war, his faith in humanity's potential for good has been so violated, that all he can do now is either die or give in to the primitive side of human nature, and embrace the fact that he is a murderer without a conscience. Before he can do this, however, he must confront the only man who seems to have successfully embraced that primitivism without giving into death, Colonel Kurtz. Before we move on to discussing the actual content within the film, I want to point out that while the script started out purely as John Milius's work, Francis Ford Coppola had no intention of sticking purely to what was on the printed page. In fact, if one were to compare Milius's original script to what is seen in the final film, less than 20% of Milius's work remained. The reason for this has to do with Coppola's masterful grasp of the source material. To repeat what I said in the first video in this series, the core message of Heart of Darkness is as follows. Given the appropriate circumstances, the most civilized of human minds can be corrupted, and we can become the most resentful, cruel, murderous creatures. Coppola understood this, and so he knew that in order to truly make the film his own, to truly make his film great, he would need to put himself in the most hellish of circumstances, and heavily edit Milius's script based on his intuition.
But I think very early on, I knew that even when I arrived there, I was going to take John's script and kind of mate it with Heart of Darkness and whatever happened to me in the jungle. I mean, I knew that was like my concept.
I think it's about time that we go into the jungle and see how Coppola's experiment evolved into a masterpiece. Needless to say, it wasn't without personal cost. Starting at the very beginning of the film, we witness the character of Willard going through a psychological breakdown. To begin, he narrates to the audience about how war has broken him in every possible way, citing things like the breakdown of his marriage, as well as his desire to get back into the jungle. The reality of the war has now seeped into his momentarily safe existence, as he imagines the sounds of rotating helicopter blades emanating from the ceiling fan of his hotel. As the scene progresses, we start to see some pretty disturbing things. We see Willard envisioning himself appearing from the shadows, wearing tribalistic makeup. We see him doing some sort of martial art, moving his hands around as if in some spiritual trance. Then, as the music picks up, Willard's behavior gets more intense. He breaks his hand on the mirror, his hand starts to bleed, he rubs the blood on his face, and then he rails around naked on the floor while crying out in agony. While the imagery is disturbing on its own, there is a question at the back of our minds while watching this scene that is potentially more disturbing. How did Martin Sheen get into such a state of mind where he was able to give such a powerful acting performance? Well, first of all, he wasn't acting. The scene was filmed on Sheen's 36th birthday, August 3rd, 1976. Naturally, he decided to get heavily intoxicated, despite the fact that filming had to take place. However, while watching the documentary, it seemed that Coppola had no issue with letting Sheen indulge in alcohol. I can only determine that the reason why Coppola permitted this was because he knew that having Sheen be heavily inebriated would help facilitate his goal for the scene. Eleanor Coppola, the documentary's director and narrator, addresses this with the following quote.
Francis was going for a moment where you see Martin Sheen's dark side, his primeval being or something, some part of him that would lead you to understand how this person could commit an assassination.
Originally, when Sheen was signed on to play Willard, he was a bit confused as to how he was supposed to play this character, so he approached Coppola looking for advice.
I remember complaining to Francis one day about my confusion about all that was going down, and I said to him, I don't know who this guy is. Who is this Willard? And Francis just looked me square in the eye and he said, he's you. Whoever you are. Whatever we're filming at the time. You are that character.
Follow me here as I try to piece together Sheen's thought process following Coppola's comments. If Coppola said that the character of Willard is Martin Sheen, and the scene called for the character of Willard to confront the primitive savage side of his soul, Sheen and or Coppola probably realized that being in an inebriated state would bring that savagery to the surface so it could be captured on camera, and thus, everything we see on screen in the film is not acting. This is actually Martin Sheen having a psychological breakdown. We can pinpoint the beginning of this breakdown when Willard smashes the mirror with his hand. Martin Sheen actually broke his hand while punching the mirror by accident because he didn't realize how close he was to it.
Francis tried to stop it, and he called for a doctor. There was a nurse standing by, and I said, no, let it go. I want to have this out right here and now. It had to do with facing my worst enemy, myself. I was in a chaotic spiritual state inside.
It is at this point, in both the movie and the documentary, that we see the beginning of the end, the culmination of the journey towards the heart of darkness, not just for Willard or for Sheen, but for ourselves. At some point in all of our lives, we have traveled to that location within, where we single out the evil within us and react in horror. We reflect on the worst parts of our being, the worst acts that we have committed, and we cry out like Martin Sheen did as he confronted his own darkness.
You fucker!
Think about it. Your wife. Home. Car.
My heart is broken.
Sheen said that he wanted to have this out, here and now. While a film set might not have been the most ideal location to have this type of a breakdown, I believe that Sheen believed that if he didn't have it out, that at some point in his life that inner darkness might have consumed him. After all, a few months later, on March 3rd, 1977, Sheen had a heart attack. This was likely the result of Sheen feeling quote-unquote old and out of shape, smoking 3 packs a day, on top of binge drinking. What might have happened if Sheen didn't confront that evil part of himself and quell its poison? Thankfully, Sheen lived on, likely because he won that inner battle, amongst many others. But what about those who do not win that battle? Death is certainly a possibility, but others might embrace that inner evil and let it consume their entire being. Ultimately, that is the story of Captain Willard, which we shall see to its end in the next video.